Hello and welcome to Module 4 Smart Board Training video, where the topic is adding lines and shapes and manipulating them in various ways in Smart Notebook. So learning targets are, I can add various shapes, I can change the properties of those shapes such as the size, the line color, fill, the line style, and the transparency. I can add a gradient fill, a pattern fill, and an image fill to a shape, so various types of fills there. I can set the current shape properties as default if you find something that works well for you and you can come back to it easy by setting it as default. I can create shapes with a shape recognition pen, which is a pretty neat tool. I can divide shapes into equal parts. I can show and hide the vertices, angles, and lengths of those shapes, so showing those values there. I can order multiple shapes so they lay on top of each other the way that I want, very similar to how we ordered the text, the pen, and the images in previous modules. I can group multiple shapes so they act as one object, again very similar as grouping that we've seen before. Now onto lines. I can add lines and change the properties of those lines, such as the color, thickness, style, the beginning and end of what they look like. I can set the current line properties as default if it's something that you want to come back to. I can group lines with other lines and shapes so they act as one object, again very similar to the grouping we've already done. I can lock shapes and lines into place along with images, text, and pen input. I can save objects and pages into the My Content section of the gallery. This is review from Module 3, along with a lot of these things like locking and grouping and ordering that kind of carry over to things we've seen before. And then I can delete shapes and lines, and again very similar to deleting other objects that we've seen. Let's add various shapes to a blank page in Notebook. I'll hit the button for a new page, and right beside the selector button is a button with a square and a circle on it. And once I hit that, a bunch of shapes pop out there, and a drop-down box will pop out a bunch more. So let's see how a few of these work. I've got circle selected. Circle is the only one that wherever I tap or click will be the center of the circle, and dragging from there will determine the size of that circle. After that, it's pretty much corner to diagonal corner to decide the size of each of these shapes. So a rounded cornered rectangle, a sharp cornered rectangle here, we've got a right angle triangle, heart, and so on and so on. So oval, pretty self-explanatory. This is a square, so it will not matter, it will keep all four sides the same length. This triangle will stay symmetrical, but it's not exactly equilateral. Here is a half circle or half oval. Nice star here. Let's do some of these that drop down. Like hexagon. Parallelogram. Just check box. Oh, and these are kind of fun. The thought bubble versus the speech bubble. So you can see, just the way I drag around, it changes the size and the shape as I'm creating these things. Okay, now let's take a look at that other button used to add various shapes. Remember, all of these were under this button here with the square and circle. The one right beside it with the hexagon and the pentagon are used to add equilateral shapes. We'll see every single one of these numbered by the number of sides that they have. The 3 is a triangle, 4 is a square. Notice all sides being equal in length. So 6 would be a hexagon. Let's jump over to 8, an octagon. Running out of my knowledge, decagon. All the way up to, let's see, a 16-sided something-agon. Math teachers help me out. But basically, just as before, you drag from one diagonal to the opposite diagonal to make those. Now let's mess with the various properties of these shapes. Now, just like with text and with pen, there are properties that we can change before we make the shape that will apply, or we can go ahead and make the shape and then edit those properties after the fact. So we'll do a little bit of both. Let's start a new page here. I'll switch to one of my 2 shape buttons, and remember either one pops out all the shape options beside there, but then further down, and it may be in this area if you're on your computer and not the screen, and you'll see these properties as well. And then friendly reminder that lots of these properties are reflected over here as well. So we can see kind of 2 buttons up here actually coming into play when it comes to shapes, because I can mess with the fill effects or I can mess with the line style. Just like over here, I can mess with the the fill, and that's the fill color versus the line color. Notice there are two color choices to mess with there, as well as the line style and thickness, and then transparency. So anyway, let's get a shape in here. Why not this lovely triangle? Okay, so notice I didn't change any of the attributes, I just did the triangle. So what I can do is come over here and say, well, I actually want that to be yellow and then have a nice blue border. Want it to be dotted and quite thick. And let's put a little transparency on there and see what we come up with. Okay, it's thinking about it. Okay, so we can see, and I'm going to change it to selector to kind of move these things around. We can see the difference between a shape just made without messing with the properties and then a shape with those properties. Now, if I wanted this shape to have properties after the fact, here's where I would select it. And remember, selecting is nothing but tapping on part of it. When it's not filled, it doesn't count the middle as part of it. So notice I do have to tap on that line. And then as soon as I do, I can start messing with these. So maybe even try to duplicate what I did over here. Yellow and blue. Let's do a different dotted just to differentiate. How about even thicker? And then throw in a little more transparency. Okay, so we can see I was able to edit those either way, either before or after. Now we can also notice under the properties here, except for object animation, which we will cover but not quite yet, we see this stuff reflected. The color, the thickness, the line style. Notice oddly enough, let's see, we got color, now that would be the line color, and then fill effects color, that would be the fill color. So it's divided up a little differently, but remember, properties here on that fourth tab are often mirrored by properties up here. Now let's talk about a few more fill options aside from just assigning a color. Now remember, we can do properties that pop up here, and that's how we decided to make these have a yellow fill color. Remember, the properties are also this fourth tab down here. So with that triangle selected, since I've already got it there, might as well mess with the properties after the fact. Notice it's on that solid yellow fill. If I select gradient fill, well, it's on blue, and then as I arrow down, we see it goes from blue to white on a horizontal plane. So as I shift across, it goes from dark blue to lighter blue, heading towards white. But I can change that, of course. Let me make sure I'm still selected there. Back to the properties tab. For example, I can go the other way around, white to blue, and we can see how it goes from one color to another one. And of course, as I've got it selected, I can change horizontal to vertical or forward diagonal, backward diagonal, so mess around to get the desired effect, and it can be from any one color to another one. Now, while it's still selected, let's check out the pattern fill. As I select that, lots of different options. So to mess around with putting a pattern in a shape, we just mess around with these. Background color, foreground color. You can get into the colors as well. But let's just assign one just to see it work. And there's my pattern fill. Let me select that object again, go back to my properties tab. We can see an image fill. Now, if I were to browse and find an image on my computer, and it can act as the fill for a shape. Now let's see how to save properties of a shape as the default. Say every time I made a right angle triangle, I wanted to have these exact properties with this fill and that line style. So let's see how to make that easy to come back to. I'll make a new page and go ahead and pick any shape. Maybe I'm making a thinking map, and I'd like my rectangles to, let's see, be green filled and blue border, maybe a little thicker line to bold it out. We'll keep the line style as solid. And basically with those properties all selected, I can go to my fourth tab down, my properties tab, and we see the Save Tool Properties is now available. Once I tap it, it's official now, and we can see it verified by now. I have a blue border, green rectangle up there, and every time I switch to that, even if I switch off and do another shape, if I switch back to that, it will have the properties that I've just specified. Now let's take a look at another way to make shapes entirely. Instead of using one of the two shape tools up here, I'll go back to my pens and select the bottom shape recognition pen. Now, this is kind of neat. Basically it attempts to recognize the shape I'm attempting to make and square it up, make it official. So if I draw a circle, it should pop into a nice clean circle. If I draw what I think would be a square, it pops right into that. Triangle, let's see. Now that's not equilateral. I'm not sure if I can attempt an equilateral that we can trust that to be exact. But when we check out how to add angles and side lengths, maybe we'll verify that. How detailed can we get? Let's see. Nope. Okay, so it looks like we're pretty limited. Circles, squares, and triangles. Even a pentagon is... Oh, no, there we are. Maybe a hexagon. Let's see how far we can take this thing. Yep, I swear that was a pretty good octagon, though. You can make some room. Let's see here. Oh, now I hit pen, so I'm back on official pen, but I want my shape recognition pen. Come on, octagon. Nope. So I got up to a hexagon. I think that's where we're limited. One more shot. Come on. A septagon? Okay, there we go. Let's take a look at how to divide a shape into equal parts. It only works with circles and squares. So I select that shape. Remember, if something's filled in, I can basically tap anywhere to select it. Something like a square with no fill would not select until I hit that line, so friendly reminder there. As I select it, I get that upper right drop down, and then we'll get to divide shape. If it's any shape but a circle or square, it won't be available, but we see it there. Let's divide it into, I just pick a number, 8 equal parts. As I hit OK, it looks like all we've gotten are just the fractions added. But we can see that now each one of these pie pieces is its own object. So I can manipulate it and mess with it that way as its own object. Let's do one more example of a square. I will select that. Again, go down to divide shape. Let's see, the max. And we'll see that a square basically just divides it up into rectangles. But each one of these, again, is its own object that I can manipulate and mess with. Okay, now let's mess with a little more geometry of these shapes. I'm going to go back to that page of shapes that we made mostly with the shape recognition pen. Mainly because I'm curious as to how close we got with this one to making an equilateral triangle. But I'm going to copy it. So that was with the drop down arrow hitting copy. I'm going to make a new page. And I'm going to paste, and a quick way to do that is right click by hitting that button, tap for a right click, and remember the button was the first of the 3 in that grouping to be specific, and then just paste, and we see our triangle here. I'm going to make it bigger as the focus of our attention. So it's still selected, so I want to, remember, friendly reminder, we select it by just tapping the line. I want to pull down that drop down box, and we can see divide shape is grayed out, not available, but these 3 options are to show and hide the vertices, to show and hide the interior angles, and the side lengths. So as I hit show and hide vertices, it just gives me a little circle on each angle of that shape. So just really showing where they are, but we'll also see that those are handles to move the shape around. But before I do that, I want to show the other interior angles and then also show the side lengths. So we can see, and oddly enough, as our angles are all 60%, we can see the side lengths are off a bit, 11.3, 11.3, 11.1. And now that all the information is there, we can see as I grab these angles, as I grab these vertices, it's a dynamic information showing me how things change as I move it around. So pretty neat demonstration as to how angles and side lengths are affected as shapes change. Now let's talk about order again. Remember, we mentioned order when we decided that we wanted text over images or pen over images. Well, we can also decide which shape we want on top, as well as in relation to text and images and pen input. Let's back up to a previous slide, maybe this one, and the order is in the order that you created them. So since I made that star after the heart, I should expect the star to go on top of the heart. If I wanted to change that, well, I could do one of 2 things. I could select the star and then go down to order and send that to back, and we'll see now the stars behind the heart. If I wanted to do the other way around, I could also, with the heart and order, and I could have brought that to the front. So you can always send stuff back, you can bring it to the front. There's the complete back and the complete front, or you can just send forward or backward like one layer if you have multiple objects and you're figuring out exactly how you want to order those things. We just use those commands there. And now let's revisit grouping. Remember, grouping turns two or more objects into one object. So, we've ordered these correctly, we put the heart on top of the star, but we can't move it around as one object. There's still technically two objects. And remember, it could be any amount of objects, basically, that you can group. So let's add one more thing, this rectangle. And we can see as I move it around that it is technically behind those. So maybe I wanted to make this one on top. I'll go down here. Remember, that's order. So order, bring to front is there. So as I shrink it and put it in there, we can see it's visible. Otherwise, it would be behind that heart and star, and we wouldn't see it. So now I've got three objects. I'm in selector mode. I can verify it there or here. And this is where I, from one corner to the opposite corner, just make an imaginary box. We see all three things being selected. We can verify that with the border and the drop downs. Any of these drop downs I can hit and go to group, and then group, and just like that, now this is one object that I can manipulate and not have to worry about it coming apart as I move it around. And if something is grouped that I want ungroup, just the same is under group and then ungroup, and then now we can see while they're all selected, they'll still move together, but if I grab them one at a time now, we can see they're three separate objects again. Now let's transition from working with shapes to working with lines. I'm going to go to this page that we made before, maybe knock out a few of these shapes, where I can just highlight and delete them. And then, maybe this was some kind of flow chart that I wanted to connect with various lines. So we go up to here. This is the line tool. Right off the bat, you can see lots of different options, and these are customizable, similar to the way that our text buttons were, and the shapes allow us to do extra things, so we can carry over a lot of the same ideas. So basically, we start off on a regular line, and notice it's a straight line. So I mean, the big difference between doing that as opposed to doing pin is, well, it forces it into being straight. Also, many of the properties that we've seen in other tools carry over. I can access those properties. Let me make sure I'm in line mode. Access these properties by just messing around with these certain buttons. And remember, we can change what the defaults are. So these are probably a bit customizable, but you can see whatever I choose, it keeps that idea of a straight line. It even snaps into the horizon, which is kind of nice. We'll also snap into the vertical. But you can see I've got an arrowhead and a dot, and you could get into those various properties. Here's the color, of course, and then that drop down will get me into line style. That's where I can mess with the start and the end, whether I want to make it dotted or the thickness. And remember, all of these, again, say I always wanted to rely on a big, thick, yellow dotted line, something like this. Oh, not dotted line. Remember, I can go into this other place to find the properties. Again, very, very similar to over here, because we see lots of the same properties. As fill effects, well, that's the object transparency, which we can mess with over here. But I wanted to point out the Save Tool properties. If I save this, we should see a graphic change over there, and with the thick line, it looks a little messy. But now I can always go back to that line as well. Of course, I'm not sure what kind of flow chart I've created here, but just basically trying to point out different ways to mess with the properties of lines. I also wanted to quick point out these two buttons here. They're a little different. This would be like if I wanted to get from here to here, but avoiding going just straight. We can do just a normal line, and we can see it arches, or a line with an arrow on the end. But all that is customizable as well. If I go here to those properties, I can make them thicker, dotted, mess with the start and the end, and again, still being, I think I'm still in that archway. We can see it's kind of interesting. Just kind of depends on how you move your finger around. or how that's going to change. Now, if I always wanted to rely on that button giving me this, I'm going to go back to Properties, Save Tool Properties, and we should now, let's just test. Right, we see now that this button is now changed, and I think I can mess with this one as well. Let's do squares on each end, another kind of dotted line, maybe a little bolder, and color green. So that's what I'm working with. If I wanted to save that, Save Tool Properties. Now, if I go back to it, get that same style. And this one, I can rely on that other style that we did. Okay, let's talk about grouping again. As we can see, I've created a sequence of events flow chart that I would probably have students come up and jot things into, or myself jotting things into. Now, as it is, these are all separate objects. We've got shapes, text, lines, as well as a little pen input there. And if I'm not careful in selector mode, this thing can start getting messed up pretty quick if I just start touching various objects. So let me use the handy undo button to get that back in order. And I'd like to just group all this stuff together so I don't have to worry about that problem. So every bit of this I want grouped. So I'm going to start in one corner or the other. Remember, find some white space and just start drawing your big selector box around everything. And now we've got everything selected. We see tons of blue dotted lines, tons of these drop-down boxes in the upper right. Remember, any of those drop-down boxes are fine for changing everything that's selected. So I'm going to go to Group here on the menu, and then Group. And now all of a sudden I don't need to worry about it getting messed up by moving around. Even if I wanted to make the whole thing bigger or smaller, I could mess with the handle there, or even do that pinch to zoom gesture that we've mentioned before with other objects. So now I really want to take it a step further, because even as it is, if I had a student come up and wanted them to jot something in there, whoops, if they weren't in pen mode, that might start messing the whole thing up. So let me lock it into place. And we've seen this with other objects, so briefly show it off here again. We go to Lock, and then Lock into place. And now, even if I make the mistake of trying to write it in selector mode, it's not going to move the whole thing around. And now that I'm in pen mode, let's see, we could keep going. Let me mention briefly, this is a little off topic, but the default pen thickness is pretty thick. So I have to go over here and realize that I can get that thin pretty quick. So it's just a way to get more pen in a smaller place. Now imagine I wanted to save this for using it in multiple lessons. Not only would it be a good idea to just save the lesson itself, but remember, we can also save it into my gallery so you could pull it up in various lessons. Of course, I'd want to get the pen out of there, so I'm going to switch to eraser and erase this. Nice thing about it being locked, it won't erase the locked pen input that's part of this whole object. So in selector, I probably want to do it this way. There's always, of course, a couple different ways to do it. I could start dragging it over into my content, and that works great. Now we can see it showing up there. The other way to go is to hit the drop-down box right here in the page sorter view. Remember, that's the first tab. And then I can also add page to galleries. So I'm guessing we will see it duplicated once there and again there. And then remember, if I ever want to bring that up in any random lesson, let me add a new page, a blank page here. I go to my gallery, and that's this tab here, find what I'm looking for, and just drag it right over. And it will occupy that space. Let's quick mention how to delete lines and shapes. You should be pretty familiar with the idea. Take this shape for example. I can hit my drop-down box after selecting it and just go to delete. One thing I don't think I pointed out as another option, while it's selected, can also hit this little X right there. And if that X is not showing up there for you, this gear will let you customize what's up here. So we haven't mentioned that, but there's some tools here that you might find that it's nice to have them easily accessible. So we see delete here is already there. Another, clear ink that would be like erasing all ink at one time. That could be handy. So I could drag this up here and kind of sneak it in wherever. It does take up more real estate, so you kind of find what works best for you there. But again, two ways to delete those things. Just get to here, and that's probably your best bet. I'd like to quick show off how to delete lines as well. Just basically to keep in mind that the drop-down box ends up popping up in the middle of the line. So as opposed to the corner, of course lines don't really have a corner, so they opt to put the drop-down box in the middle of whatever line I select. So I can drop that down and hit delete there, or I can have it selected and go to that delete shortcut button there. And there we have it, the conclusion of Module 4. Looking forward to what y'all can come up with using shapes and lines. Please feel free to meet with me face-to-face. Just let me know when is a good time for you, and we can work it out if you'd like me to guide you through some of this stuff.